of course, it gives Steve Witkoff something to work with in the context of engagement with Ukraine and with Russia, but also something for him to work with in Washington to show that Europe is doing its bit.
We hope. Now, you've walked into some breaking news. At about 7 o'clock, we got a tweet from Stephen Swinford, the Times political editor, who just scooped by a few minutes the news from Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer that there would be a joint declaration, the UK and France signing up with their intent to deploy forces to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal. And of course, the draft statement said the US will agree to support the force if it is attacked. I'm just trying to find the actual statement to see if the detail is there on that as well. But what is your instant reaction to British boots on the ground in Ukraine?
It is a significant moment, of course, but it's all very provisional because it's talking about this happening when and if there is a peace deal. So that a peace deal goes beyond a ceasefire, of course, which is what Donald Trump has largely been pursuing. And also the Prime Minister himself, the British Prime Minister himself, has said this evening that he doesn't feel that Russia is in the mood for a peace deal at the moment. So it's an important reassurance for Ukraine, and it's important too that the Americans appear to be putting at least some support behind it, saying that they will monitor this deal and that they will support British and French in the event of an attack on Ukraine. But one has to wonder to what extent that's worth. And one also has to wonder how the UK, given its present, fairly hard-pressed military posture, is going to be able to put anything credible into Ukraine, without delivering on that significant defence spending that's been talked about, but not so far earmarked by the Starmer government. As far as Macron goes, he, of course, has said before that he felt it might come to there having to be French troops on the ground in Ukraine.
He was the outlier, wasn't he, originally on that?
And he has been the convener of this meeting. I heard you talking before the news about Germany's role. I don't think it's any surprise that Germany is not part of this, even although Germany is in the process of rearming. I think the idea of forward deployed German forces, given 20th century history, would not be something which people would welcome at this particular stage. And of course, what Germany under Friedrich Merz is proposing doing is picking up a large, the largest chunk of the defence bill for Ukraine.
Let's hear from Keir Starmer, actually. This was in the news conference after the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing Nations today, alongside Steve Witkoff, the US envoy, and Jared Kushner as well of the US. Let's hear. Interesting. Both sides looking to de-escalate. That may be wishful thinking if that gets to that point. Let's get some reaction now from Paddy McGuiness, who's former UK Deputy National Security Advisor, now a Senior Advisor at the Brunswick Group. Paddy, good evening to you.
Good evening. Thanks for having me on.
Set this out for us. How significant is this joint declaration, the prospect of British boots on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a peace deal?
Well, as Adam said, it is a significant moment. And of course, it gives Steve Witkoff something to work with in the context of engagement with Ukraine and with Russia, but also something for him to work with in Washington to show that Europe is doing its bit. And I absolutely agree with Adam about the implausibility of Germany taking on this particular role. I was looking at what was offered under the Budapest Memorandum, the original security guarantee to Ukraine. And if you look at that, that had no automaticity of support and no commitment to a presence on the ground. And so I do think this is quite a significant step in those terms as well from what has been offered previously, which may be a help to President Zelensky.
Yeah, what I wonder, though, is does it increase the pressure on President Putin to reach an agreement?
I think it's easy. I'm slightly sceptical at the idea of pressure on Putin to reach an agreement from what is being offered in these deals. I don't think we have the necessary levers to really pressure him.
No, I mean, I suppose the hope, and one of the reasons why the Europeans have been so careful not to criticise Donald Trump over Venezuela, the hope is that now that the Americans have made a commitment, if you like, to this settlement, and of course it is significant that the Witkoff and his companion are actually speaking to Zelensky, which is something they didn't used to do. They seem to have come to the Europeans on that side. But the other part, if this war is going to be halted anytime soon, most people believe it has to be pressure from the United States on Russia. And, maybe we're seeing those plates moving. What do you think?
It would be nice to think so. I mean, the way this has played out previously is that when there have been options and when Ukraine has been engaged, Turkey's been engaged, Europe's been engaged, or individual European states have been engaged, Russia has then been very happy to enter into just a direct engagement with the United States and kind of slightly set everyone aside and have separate conversations. And they're very happy to move between US organized talks with Ukraine in proximity, then into bilateral talks with the US. And I would expect a bit more of that, I think what is called in Washington, D.C., kabuki dance, rather than any real movement on Russia's part.
Stephen Swinford's just been, the Times political editor has been breaking some of this down on X. Donald Trump has agreed to both deter attacks by Russia and, if it comes to it, defend Ukraine in the event of a peace deal with Russia. Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, as we've said, says that the commitment is as strong as anyone's seen. The president strongly stands behind security protocols. Those security protocols are meant to A, deter any attacks in Ukraine, and B, if there are any attacks, they are meant to defend, and they will do both. This is as strong a commitment as anyone has ever seen. So if we talk about peace enforcement, I mean, there is a little bit of ambiguity here about the role the US will have and also what the rules of engagement are. Are UK and French troops aided by the US? Are they peacekeepers? Are they observers? They don't retaliate? Or are they peace enforcement, which it seems to suggest here from Witkoff that they might be? Troops will take action against any Russian breach of ceasefire. What do you make of it, Paddy?
Well, as you rightly said, or I think Adam rightly said, we simply don't have the numbers to do this across a 2,000-kilometre border with Russia, and that doesn't take account of the border with Belarus, which is also an issue. So this is going to be a tripwire force, and it's telling that the term hub is being used. So these are going to be seemingly concentrations of troops deployed. And I would have thought the rules of engagement will be defined partly in dialogue with the Ukrainians, who will want to have a say into what foreign troops can do on their territory. But there obviously will be strong self-defense. And therefore, if the Russians start moving, you can expect them to have to be ready to fight. It's worth saying that, of course, we've seen from Russia an enormous capability of ambiguous and hybrid warfare, the use of forces disguised as civilians, the use of Ukrainians, use of course, cyber and other electronic warfare techniques. So this is going to be a very complex deployment and very hard to discern, short of Russian troops running at you, the real way in which you're being attacked, and to set thresholds.
You rightly use the word tripwire for this, but I just wonder if there are British or French forces in a forward position, and if they were to be attacked by the Russians, would that, given that they were operating out of theatre, would that be a trigger for Article 5 of mutual defence?
No, I don't think it would be. We've seen Russian irregular troops, and indeed we can argue whether irregular or irregular, in Syria, toe-to-toe with Americans when there was a campaign against Islamic State. And of course, we've seen the Wagner group in some ways toe-to-toe with the French in West Africa previously, and those haven't been Article 5 incidents.
Can I ask you, Paddy McGuiness, whether this could be a potential spanner in the works of any peace deal? How will Russia react to all these nations gathering and signing these joint declarations, statements of intent, the presence of Witkoff and Kushner? Will Russia take this seriously, or will they use this as a provocation? Could it get in the way of a peace deal?
I think Russia has been lining up reasons not to have a peace deal. We've had the unconfirmed drone attacks supposedly aimed at President Putin as an example already of a way of trying to kind of distract from what's going on here. The classic pattern from Russia has been to step up and say that the Europeans are kind of pygmies and knock them aside and try and just engage directly with Donald Trump. The question is whether we've reached a point where President Trump and his Witkoff and Kushner are actually prepared to say, no, we're not going to enter into direct engagement with you. We're going to insist that you engage with this wider process that we've created.
Okay.
We haven't yet seen that, I have to say, and I'm not convinced that will be their ultimate preference if the Russians insist on bilateral engagement.
Still on the US, but heading to Greenland, let's just ask you what you make of the comments of the US Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller overnight. Said no one would stand in the way of America if they took control of Greenland.
The real question is, by what right does Denmark assert control over Greenland? What is the basis of their territorial claim? What is their basis of having Greenland as a colony of Denmark? The United States is the power of NATO. For the United States to secure the Arctic region, to protect and defend NATO and NATO interests, obviously Greenland should be part of the United States. And so that's a conversation that we're going to have. There's no need to even think or talk about this in the context that you're asking of a military operation. Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland.
I interpret that as come and have a go if you think you're hard enough, that the US has the right to seize Greenland. Donald Trump's also said the United States needs to take over Greenland. These assertions will not die down, no matter how fantastical they feel at the moment. What do you make of it?
There's a strong sense of kind of unreality about this. I mean, there are very small numbers. What are we talking about? 70,000 Greenlanders. There are, I think, 200 or 300 American troops, sometimes swelled by, none of them combat, or none of them ground forces anyway, in the US base there, sometimes swelled by other aircraft deployments and the like. And I think were Greenland threatened by a hostile force, by the, let's say, Russian action in the Arctic, it would probably be the United States who would come to their aid in the first case, perhaps supported by Danes and others, but it would be US protection that would come. So there's a kind of slight sense of unreality about all of this. When I have engaged with US officials on this, they slightly roll their eyes and suggest that this is manoeuvring and trying to kind of roll the pitch and prepare the way for some other kind of negotiation about future arrangements for Greenland, which seems more likely to me.
Because of their critical mineral resource.
No, because they're of geostrategic importance.
Yeah, well, yeah, and also that.
I mean, I have to say I'm a bit more, sanguine about this possibly happening, because I think that Steve Miller, who is, very much the kind of the Goebbels of MAGA, if you like, has put his finger on something that, were America to claim Greenland without necessarily, sending in the troops or anything, I think people wouldn't go to war over it, and therefore they could acquire it. And the reality of the situation in Greenland at the moment is, first of all, that although it is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, the Greenlanders, limited number of them, 30,000, are not particularly friendly towards Denmark. They don't think Denmark's treated them particularly well. The answer to Miller's question is that there was a treaty signed after the Second World War which gave Greenland to Denmark, which is the legal claim. But even in the statement, the supposed tough statement that the Europeans put out today before the meeting to do with Ukraine. They say, well, look, this is up to the Greenlanders and Denmark. So I can see a circumstance in which continued and concerted pressure from Donald Trump does at least put who Greenland belongs to onto the agenda. And it's also clear that although he keeps on talking about defence and all the rest of it, that this is about his vision of being the first president since McKinley to expand the United States, to get more territory. That's what he sees as part of his legacy. So I don't say it with any great joy, but I think this is more of a serious issue.
OK, all right, we will leave it there for time. Some interesting thoughts there from both of you. Paddy McGuiness, former UK Deputy National Security Advisor, now a Senior Advisor at the Brunswick Group. Thank you to you.